Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today in person. My first time at CODART. I'm very honored to have been invited to speak to you. My name is Treanor. My full name is Virginia. I go by Ginny. And I am the senior curator at the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. And for those of you who might not know, NIMWA, to call it by its rather unfortunate acronym, NIMWA, maybe this museum can be KMSCA. NIMWA it opened in 1987, and it is the first museum dedicated to collecting, preserving, and showcasing art by women from the 16th through the 21st centuries, so up to contemporary. Now, even though my own academic background is in Dutch and Flemish art of the 17th century, I must confess I feel like a bit of a black sheep amongst you, as I have been in my current position for over 10 years, where I have operated as what is politely called a generalist. So what could I possibly have to say to you, this group of curators whose purview it is to think about the art of the Low Countries on a daily basis? My charge is to speak to you about Flemish women artists, which I will show you, two of here. Yet there are those in this audience who have worked on exhibitions about Clara Peters and Michelina Woutier, comme vous voulez, artists whom happily are known today by much wider audiences than ever before. So I will not lecture you on the lives and works of these worthy artists, of whom many of you undoubtedly know more than I. Instead, I would like to impart some thoughts about a topic in which I am uniquely positioned to discuss, and that is the overall place of women artists, Flemish, Dutch, and otherwise, within the context of the current art historical narrative in museums. Focusing mostly on the 17th century, I will look at the current state of affairs and discuss some ways that we, collectively as curators, can support research and foster inclusion of women artists in our collections and exhibitions. The first thing I would like to note is that notwithstanding the aforementioned exhibitions on Peters and Woutier, as well as on their Dutch counterparts, and their excellent attendant publications, there is somewhat of a gap between scholarship on women artists of the Low Countries and museum presentation. And by presentation, I mean acquisition, conservation, display and collection galleries, and of course, exhibitions. While exhibitions on Dutch and Flemish women artists over the past 40 years or so can be counted on one hand, the academic scholarship on the subject is happily a bit more robust. In 1981, Margarita Russell's article, The Women Painters in Haalbrachen's Rosa Schouwburg, appeared in the Women's Art Journal and reminded readers that Haalbrachen not only wrote about women painters, but helpfully announced them in the title of his work. 1989 saw the publication of Frema Fox Hofrichter's Catalogue Raisonné on Judith Leister, followed a few years later by an exhibition. In 1998, Vrouwen en Kunst in de Republiek, edited by Els Klook, Catherine Peters-Snegers, and Esther Tobé, appeared, and, might I add, is a veritable treasure trove of information on women in the northern and southern Netherlands, including an index of some 237 names, I counted them, of women artists and patrons between 1500 and 1800. So if you're looking for an exhibition topic, I suggest you take a look at that. 1999 saw the even more temporally wide-ranging publication and exhibition Elkslijn Vargom, Women Artists in Belgium and the Netherlands, 1500 to 1950, by Katelijne van der Stichelen, Mirjam Westen, and Maaike Meijer, and Elizabeth Honing's The Art of Being Artistic, Dutch Women's Creative Practices in the 17th Century of 2001, also in the Women's Art Journal, thoughtfully discusses the range of artistic production among women, as well as the gender bias behind descriptions like amateur. More recent resources include, again, by Katelijne van der Stichelen, Vrouwenstrekken, Female Painters in the Low Countries, 1550 until now, of 2010, the 2019 collection of essays edited by Elizabeth Sutton, Women Artists and Patrons in the Netherlands, 1500 to 1700, And in 2020, the publication Gouden Vrouwen by Judith Norman and her team of students at the University of Amsterdam. And I would also like to mention that Judith and her team have just launched, really within the past week, their website, The Female Impact. And here's the home screen of that website. So, research abounds, information grows by the day, and there is no dearth of material. So why have the lives and works of Dutch and Flemish women artists generally gone so unexamined in museums? Now, happily, as I've been speaking with a couple of you, this is a tide that is currently turning. And I would like to commend our colleagues, many of whom are in attendance today, who have done important work recently to incorporate women artists into our broader museum discourse through acquisitions and exhibitions in their institutions. And I know these aren't the only two examples. I know that there are more, but I'm trying to stick with the Flemish theme here. So there have been some really wonderful and high-profile acquisitions of Dutch and Flemish women artists in recent years, as you can see here, in both Europe and the US, that are a great beginning to righting the balance. However, if we look past the buzz that these acquisitions rightfully generate, the overall picture is not quite so rosy. And here I'm showing you a visualization of data published in 2019 by ArtNet News and In Other Words that reflects information gathered on the acquisition of women artists by 26 American museums. So this is only American museums right now, between 2008 and 2018. And you can see that the data is broken down by time period with the key on the right-hand side. The best performing category, not surprisingly, is contemporary art. And then very hard to see down at the bottom, you see it all the way down there at the bottom, literally flatlining, is acquisition of art by women before 1900. That same study also looked at worldwide, so this is global now, worldwide auction results between 2008 and 2019 and found that just 2% of almost $200 billion spent at auction over that time was on work by women artists. And this is all women artists of all time periods. So let's return to 17th century art by women from this region of the world. Unfortunately, I don't have any facts regarding percentages of museum acquisitions or auction sales for this specific group at my fingertips, but if I did, I think we can see that they would probably track with these overall numbers, which is to say, not great. So, I can hear you all thinking now very loudly that, of course, these numbers are necessarily low because there are just not as many works by women out there. Fair enough, but I do have a couple of counterpoints to this argument. The first is that there could be, and most definitely are, more works by women out there. As I mentioned before, we have the names, we have the contemporary evidence that women were painters and printers, among other things, and I will return to those other things in a moment, throughout the 17th century. What we do often lack is extant attributed work. And that last part is key because, as we know all too well, work by women is often hiding in plain sight, attributed to male teachers or relatives or the ever-present anonymous. To drive this point home, I'm showing you the now very well-known self-portraits of Michelina Boutier, Judith Leister, and Maria Schalken, all of which, at some point in their histories, were attributed to male artists. Boutier to Abraham van den Tempel, Leister to Frans Hals, and Schalken to her brother Godfried. It is only thanks to the painstaking, thorough research and collaboration between academic and museum colleagues that works by these artists and others have been correctly identified and their legacies really rescued from oblivion. Moving forward, it is the responsibility of all of us to contribute to such work by looking at our own collections, publishing findings concerning any works by women located therein, and hanging them on the wall. As we have seen most recently with the case of Michelina Boutier, the excellent and diligent work of Katelijne van der Stichelen has put a spotlight on this deserving artist, which in turn has yielded more work and more opportunity for study and exhibition. And here I show you Vautier's series of the 5 senses, which was unlocated at the time of Catline's exhibition in 2018, but as a direct result of that exhibition, came to light and is currently now on view at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Now, lest I leave you thinking that the historical exclusion of women artists from museum collections and exhibitions is due entirely to the bad luck of their names being forgotten, never mind the fact that many of them actually signed their work, as was the case with the Leicester and the Schalken self-portrait, I would briefly like to highlight the example of Rauchhaus, a painter well-known, successful, and lauded throughout her long lifetime. Surprisingly, perhaps because she was so well-known, right, Rauchhaus's works were seldom misattributed. We can even see that sales of her work remained consistently high in the art market even after her death. And this is a graph that is plotting sales data for Rauchhaus's paintings pulled from the Getty Provenance Index that show the sale of her paintings from 1693, when she was still very much alive, all the way until almost the middle of the 20th century. And you'll notice there's that gap between 1862 and 1897, and that's just because the data hasn't been digitized yet. So, for comparison, we can look at this data together with the sales data for Rauchhaus's teacher, Willem van Alst. Rauch in red, van Alst in blue. You can see that her paintings sold as well and often better than his. Rauch's market successes, however, did not readily translate into acceptance into the canon of Dutch art that was being formed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and many important museum collections, particularly in the United States, do not have a single example of her work yet. So until this point, we have dealt with women painters specifically. Within Western art history, painting has long been seen as the highest in the category of high art. In theory and in practice, this art form has been dominated by men. The women who succeeded in this profession did so in spite of many obstacles engendered by their status as women within patriarchal power structures. However, if we widen our definition of art to include items that circulated in the same luxury economy as painting and sculpture, such as lace and embroidery, things that have historically been termed decorative or craft and just so happen to have been made predominantly by women, then all of a sudden we let more women into the conversation about cultural production. There are also the works made by middle and upper class women for personal fulfillment and gift exchange that can tell us much about their lives and social circles. We can open the door to the wonderful and crazy world of paper cutting with artists like Johanna Kurtenblock and Elizabeth Hreiberg, whose creations were sought after by royalty and sold for enormous sums, with one of Block's works reputedly selling for more than Rembrandt's Night Watch. So I leave you with this. Dutch and Flemish women were an integral part of the unprecedented artistic economy of the 17th century. Not only as makers, as I've outlined above, but also as collectors, patrons, and dealers. So it is up to us, my friends, as curators, to share the lives and works of women with the museum-going public. Because if we don't, we are only telling half of the story. Thank you.